Hey, David, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, Wesley, thanks for having me. It's a joy to be on here and hopefully help some people out with how are we telling stories during this time.
I know it's great to reconnect. I know I had first done a little bit of work down in Ecuador, kind of connected with you guys. I mean, man, that would have been, I think 2013. I mean, so it was a little while ago, and then have been able to, reconnect since then. But it's been a while, but it's always great to connect with you guys. I absolutely am a huge fan of the work that you guys are doing, and just wanted to check in about how things are going right now and how the COVID-19 is impacting you guys. But for those who might not be familiar, could you just kind of go over a little bit, like, what is Silent Images and what do you guys do?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit organization that provides professional photography and video to other nonprofits, and we're about 50% of our projects are overseas, and about 50% are right here in the States. So we try to provide high-level production at a low cost. Every charity has to kick something in and pay something towards their production, but they might get a, $5,000 or $6,000 value and only have to pay, under $1,000 or $1,000. It just depends on their budget. So we really exist to try to help them tell their story, and we serve sometimes large nonprofits like the United Ways and Habitats and World Visions, but most of our kind of nonprofits we really love to serve are those smaller, mid-size. We call them the toddlers. They've been around 5-6 years. They're growing. They've gotten big enough to where they really do have a robust story to tell, a great story to tell, and they just don't have budget for it, and they can't hire. They don't have their own videographer, and they've kind of they've made things work for a few years just by doing things on their own or finding volunteers, and sometimes that can be clunky and just they don't get what they really want, and so they kind of come to us finally going, okay, we're ready to do a professional production, but we've priced it out there. We can't afford the high level professional production, so we come in and go, hey, we got a staff who are great professionals, and we'll give you that level of storytelling, but not at that cost. So that's what we do. We usually produce probably about 100 to 125 productions a year, which ends up being 50 to 60 different charities. Obviously, we serve several charities over and over again throughout the year. Sometimes we do our own productions. Sometimes we just produce short films, like we just did a whole film series on mental health and trying to raise awareness on mental health and telling stories and creating a curriculum for small groups and schools and churches to use as a way to start the conversation around mental health. So sometimes we kind of have our own passion projects too that we do with video. So
no, that's great. And one of the things I feel like loved about you guys is that you do work all around the world, yet you manage to really have like an intentional, like, Charlotte grounding kind of as a home base, and you're not neglecting like your neighbors and those closest to you with always doing stuff that's like internationally. How's that process been? I feel like it's been intentional for you guys, but have you kind of walked through that process?
yeah, I mean, we started off mostly doing international, but then there were a lot of local charities who said, hey, we need help too. We've got great stories, and so we wanted to listen to them and wanted to make sure that we didn't overlook our neighbors by just going overseas and thinking the greatest needs are always, and that's not just in Charlotte. I mean, we do a lot of production in a lot of different states now around the US. So we love telling domestic stories, and we know that there's a lot of charities domestically who don't have budget either, but have great stories. So yeah, we feel like it's important to make sure, particularly for Charlotte, to take care of our home city too, especially during this time with COVID. I mean, that's obviously all we're doing is taking care of our city.
Yeah, so I guess with that segue, I mean, how have things changed in the last 2 months with COVID-19 for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed drastically. I mean, obviously, all of our international projects got canceled, and so all that will not be happening. Maybe not through the end of the year, and then a lot of our standard larger productions are canceled. We're not doing any type of miking up people and doing a full production, but we are now kind of shifting to much smaller, quicker productions, or things we can do that with video that we already have in our library that we can use and we can reference. So we're having to get creative. We're having to pivot, and and get creative. And like most nonprofits, it takes a hit on the budget. I mean, when you have, half of our income is by donations, and the other half is by the nonprofits we serve. And so really half of our budget has really come to a stop. And so it puts a strain on us. That we actually just launched a kind of a creative portrait kind of offer to local people here in Charlotte to go do family portraits and just kind of get some donations locally to offer that service while people are all cooped up at home to do family still shots. And that's just it's a way for us to try to raise some money is what I'm saying. Like it's taken a hit on us financially. And so you gotta do things that are not normal when times are
not
unusual.
Normal.
That's right. So that's not something we would typically do, but we've enjoyed doing it. It's been fun to get out and meet some new donors and keep Son Images going. This is our 13th year, and we're not going anywhere. COVID-19 is not going to sink us, and so we just have to get creative and just figure out other creative ways to generate income and make sure that we can weather the storm and then be back.
Oh, so you brought an interesting point up that I think was, you said about half of your income comes from producing films, and then the other half is from donations. Is that about kind of more or less kind of what the proportions are for you guys?
Yep. Yeah. So we're about half and half. So donations, foundations, grants underwrite the cost, and then the other is just from the organizations we serve.
Oh, I know that's a really interesting point, because I mean, I know there's a number of people that serve nonprofits, but I feel like you guys are a little bit in a unique spot in that you're a nonprofit yourselves serving other nonprofits, which is definitely just super, super commendable.
Yeah.
And so going back to the kind of the COVID space, I'm assuming at this point, like big shoots that involve international travel have all been canceled, yet nonprofits still have to be able to communicate the work that they're doing. What have you seen in terms of communication strategy? Like, what are people doing more of? What are they doing? Like, what actually works? I mean, not everyone else still has to keep raising money right now, and right. They still have to be communicating. Do you have any tips for people during these times?
Yeah, communication definitely needs to keep happening, and we encourage all of our past clients, to kind of tell them, hey, keep communicating to your donors. I think what you want to be careful of is donor fatigue, and not everyone rushing and asking donors for funding right now. I think to be strategic about that, but really, we are firm believers in stories. So what story can you tell right now that's positive, that's different than what they're hearing on the news? And how does that keep your donor engaged and remind your donor of who you serve? And so we're really just encouraging nonprofits to continue to tell stories. They don't have to be professional productions at this point. I think people are showing a lot of grace as to, the quality of the content, but, get it out there quickly right now and remind donors you're still serving, and introduce your donors to those who you're serving again. And maybe those short little stories of people whose lives are changed and you're helping right now during COVID. So that's what we're encouraging people to do is, and that's on your phone. Just pick up your smartphone and use that and make the best of what you have, but keep in front of your donors, but stay positive. The more that you can stay positive and hopeful and encouraging to them, I think all of us need a little different tone than what we're hearing on the mass media outlets. And I feel like nonprofits hopefully don't fall into that trap of just the tragic headlines and just leading with that, but leave with some positive stories of lives being changed.
And that's a really interesting point too, because you mentioned that you do need to stay on the forefront of donors' minds, and telling stories is a great example. But at the same time, you don't want to get donor fatigue. So it seems like it's really an interesting balance, because you don't want to just stick your head in the sand and then 5 months later be like, once or whenever things start to come back to normal and people have a little more money to donate, and then just kind of pop up all of a sudden and be like, oh yes, remember us. So you do kind of need to play that, be present, keep at the forefront, but at the same time, not necessarily constantly asking for money. So when it comes to stories, I mean, you obviously been telling stories for quite a while now. Do you have any tips for how to find a good story, since people can't necessarily send out a crew to tell it? Like, how do you identify if a story is good, and do you have a process to follow that people can follow?
Yeah, I mean, There's not necessarily a magic process.
There's no magic process, but I guess it's tips in general.
Yeah. I mean, what we encourage people is, just look for, again, that aspect of change. If a character, I mean, even when we go watch movies, right? I mean, it's if a character doesn't change within a movie, the movie gets kind of dull, right? And so we want to see a change of character, and so that can happen very quickly. It doesn't have to have a bow at the end of it and be all tied up perfectly. I think sometimes there's a little bit more honesty in that, and people enjoy that, of kind of like, hey, this story's not over, but this is where this person started, and because our nonprofit intervened, this is the result, and this is how we're beginning to see change and growth within this person, and so. But also, allow the personality, allow your viewer to connect, and so look for those personalities. They don't always have to be cute little kids. It could be anyone else who just kind of has an attractive personality. And the problem is you don't really know who's going to come alive on camera. Sometimes someone can have a fantastic personality, and then you put a camera on them, or just your phone, and you put that in front of them, and they freeze, right? And a different kind of personality comes out. And so part of that is just experimental, and you're just going to have to have 2 or 3 options, and know that probably one of them will end up being really fantastic on camera too. So but I think just making your viewer feel comfortable, and reminding them why you're telling their story. I think and any nonprofit, the people that they serve are so important to them, that they want to preserve the dignity, and and want to make sure that they don't cross any boundaries there, and just remind them, hey, we're telling this story so that more people can get help, not to embarrass you, not to exploit you in any way. And so I think that's really important to navigate that carefully. And like I said, nonprofits are usually really, really good with that. And it's something our team has to obviously navigate. And we're always learning how to do that. And we don't do it perfectly. And it's hard when you come with a big camera and a crew and people that we don't have a relationship with before. And so we have to walk that line carefully.
Cultivate that relationship. And I think that the point that you brought up of just even having someone record with the phone and seeing how it goes is a great tip, because people can, of course, be doing that right now with local staff. I mean, when you look at the number of people, even internationally, in areas that are, maybe not quite as privileged as developed, like most people still have a phone that can record video. And see, now is a great time for just people I think have a lower standard for what's being produced overseas, because of the fact they realize, well, no one's actually going from some of these areas, but those little authentic short stories do well on social media in some regard, especially if they're within like the COVID-19 context. But after being able to do those, you can always then they could be good like preliminary interviews for maybe a story later next year, or whenever people are traveling
That's
back.
Right.
Yeah. Have you seen anyone doing stuff, or is it not quite yet in terms of? In some ways, I feel like people are still kind of figuring out what the new normal looks like for producing content. Have you seen examples of people who are doing stuff, or is it still kind of too early to tell what's going to happen?
I think it's still a little too early to tell. I mean, we've been producing some 60-second kind of trailer stories for people here locally for food banks and medical relief and things like that. But I think it'll still be a little bit before people start generating it more on the the mass production. So,
and I think, and too, I guess part of that might be that while we're locked down, everyone else in other countries is locked down as well. So even if there were people in local countries that have the ability, they're not really traveling yet either. But I could see that there could potentially be a danger where like certain countries start opening up and they might be fine, but there's still a much more decrease in overall traffic from like across countries for the sake of like a second wave or repeat customers happening. So I saw that you guys had created a series on helping people, since you guys aren't doing all the filming now, a series to help people. What was that process like of thinking through that series of videos for people in terms of general tips?
I mean, it was a bunch of Zoom calls, my team and I, after we all fled this office, like everyone else. It was kind of like, one day we're all here, the next day we're watching the news, and I'm going, team, I think we're heading home for a little while. So we all go home and, Tim, who does all of our, kind of project management, just started to say, well, I'm just getting emails of cancellations. We have no production right now. And so, I just kind of began to, have some meetings with the team of, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to continue to tell stories? What do our nonprofit friends need right now? And so we kind of had, virtual whiteboard sessions where we just kind of threw up all kinds of different ideas of what can we do to serve and serve for free. I mean, we weren't looking, I was like, hey, every nonprofit is getting hit right now. So we just need to assume that we're going to do everything for free and let's just produce things that they actually need. And so that's where this whole how-to series came out of, was that conversation of us going, well, you know what? They're all scrambling right now, including pastors at churches, trying to figure out how do I do this? How do I produce content with my phone and do it as best I can? I can't hire somebody, and so we just said, you know what? There are things already out there on the internet, but what if we made things that were a little bit shorter and really all focused on you're at home, look around, what can you use? How can you be resourceful and produce the best shot from your house, both thinking about visuals and your audio and your setup, and then, kind of sharing. And so, so we launched that, and it had a great response initially.
That's great. And that's all on your YouTube channel?
It is. Yep.
So Silent Images, just search on YouTube. They'll be able to find it.
Yeah. I think there's 7 short kind of how-to videos now, and we may keep producing some more, just depending on how long this lockdown happens.
No, I mean, I looked at them and they seem like a really solid, great resource. And I think you're right, is that half of getting a good shot isn't just, do you have the right camera? It's just, where's the window in your shot? And, what does your background look like? And some of those thoughts when you just stop and think about it, where you can kind of start to really, really evaluate. No, that's great. And so I know locally, it sounded like you've done a little bit. You've also been repurposing stuff that you had previously shot. What's that been like? Is it just been kind of short teasers and, traveling out as much as you can locally, but while still being safe? I know North Carolina at the time of recording are they starting to open up a little bit, or where are they at?
Yeah, we're starting to open up a little bit, but not enough to where we can really go do much.
Go to a full shoot.
Yeah, that's right. And part of it is people's just comfort level, and putting a lapel mic on people. It's just a lot of things that there's too many things that just people aren't ready to do. And I'll be honest. I mean, nonprofits, we're not the only ones struggling. There's a lot financially struggling, and so people just don't want to spend any money on anything that doesn't seem, at least initially, necessary. And so people are being really conservative with their spending. And so nonprofits are kind of just trying to function with the bare bones. So they also, are going, hey, we just need to wait on paying anything extra for storytelling or production right now.
Yes, especially I'm sure with when a nonprofit's barely struggling or anyone is struggling to pay their own staff, salaries. It's kind of hard to do the extra stuff. But at the same time, I also recently heard that, being able to communicate more during any kind of crisis, is actually kind of a downturn is actually kind of a show of strength that does kind of help you at the other side kind of be a little more resilient and kind of stand out more. So in some ways, it is kind of that double-sided thing where you don't want to spend money, but you also want to make sure that you're able to come out stronger. Do you have any other tips on that side, or of just how to communicate? Obviously, we talked about stories, and is it just kind of, and also too, what is that balance do you find now between everything being high quality, having it look good, and being authentic? Because I've noticed a little bit of a shift in what people expect, but I just didn't know what your thoughts were being specifically on like the high quality versus just relevant in the here and now.
So the one of the questions we often ask nonprofits before we start a production is, is this, how much do you want to focus on quality versus quickness? And you kind of have to choose, is this a more of a quality production or a quicker production? And anyone in the production industry knows exactly why that's an important question, because you can't do both. And of course, they want to get things out quickly, but they don't want to compromise quality. And really, you have to make a decision. And so, in this season, you're spot on. I think the more that you can put content out there right now, the quicker it's better. I don't think people are looking for quality right now. I think they're looking for strength. They're looking for something that catches my eye and reminds me why I donate to you. And people donate because they're inspired by what you do and who you are and who you serve and the lives that are changed. And so just the more that you can remind them as to what inspired them to give to you guys in the beginning is super important. And so that's why we sent an email to all of our nonprofits we'd served and just said, hey, whether we do it or not, I think it's really important that the executive director gets some sort of message out there, and we think video is stronger than just an email to your donors, but just saying, hey, we're here, we're hopeful, we're moving forward, we're continuing to serve, and I think the strength and the inspiration and the visual of that leader kind of making that charge means a lot, and it means a lot to both the donor base and your volunteers and your staff, just to kind of see the leader out there doing that. So I think there are things that nonprofits need to continue to do and do consistently, and not worry too much about quality right now, but not, that's why we did this how-to series, is because
you don't want to be sloppy.
You don't want to be sloppy, and you don't want it to be distracting, right? I mean, you want the message to be clear. And so whatever you can do to eliminate most distractions and get a clear message, I think, that's a home run during these times.
No, and I think that is a really interesting point too, of really like the kind of the quality versus quickness. And I think you're right that right now, having something be quick is relevant. I mean, I had projects I was working on really up through February, and getting ready to release them, and really in the span of about 3 weeks, some of the videos, they just looked like weird. Like even one of the shots where we had a closing shot of people like shaking hands,
yeah,
and then which looked great 1 week. 3 weeks later, it was like, oh, they're shaking hands. This is terrible. Like, they're going to get COVID. So, that is not a good practice. And so, in that case, yes, the quality was good, but we would have done much better off had we focused on being quick and getting something out that was timely before everything completely changed. Yeah. And I think you're right that that's kind of the goal now. But it seems like really just master some of the fundamentals, and then have your message be clear. And then, two, I was curious, with your work, how much of the work in terms of the stories that tended to be obviously higher quality, did you find that people used them for more of fundraising versus using them for regular everyday social media? And so, because feel like I noticed a little bit of a trend between people creating content. If it's more regular social media, it was almost more important to be consistent, regular. It doesn't have to be huge quality. But if it's more for an in-person event, thinking a gala or someone showing the church fundraiser at a church event later or something like that, the expectation was it still needed to be high quality. Do you have any thoughts or insights there? I'm just curious to get your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's, most of the time when people contract us to work with them, it's because they are thinking about their, some sort of fundraiser dinner where they have an audience that's going to be there, and they want a little bit longer film, maybe, longer than 2 or 3 minutes. And so, as if you're going to create something longer, it's got to be done. It doesn't just have to be done professionally and with a nice camera and nice shots, but it really needs to tell a story. That's really, honestly, the only thing that's going to keep people's attention these days. It's not even a beautiful shot. Or great sound. Are you telling a story? Are you captivating me to want to keep watching? And that's harder and harder to do. And we argue that the one thing, even though photography and video in a lot of ways has been democratized in some ways. I mean, everybody has a nephew who can do a video and can edit, and everyone has a nephew who knows how to use a camera and grab some photos. But storytelling has not been democratized, and that's the one thing that you honestly, you can't even learn in school. When people try to apply for jobs for us, they'll show us their demo reel or whatever. And I'm like, I'm never wowed by somebody's by their shots and how beautiful their shots are. I'm like, can you tell a story? And that comes with some maturity. And that's really just, that's a gift that I feel like, either they have it or they don't in some ways, and they develop it. But some people just have a knack for being able to see and tell and draw out a story. So point being, that's where I think you need to focus your quality, is when you have that great story, and you decide this is a story we want to save. We don't want to just do a quick release, a 60-second trailer. This is a fantastic story. It has all the elements of a good story. Let's do this professionally and have someone kind of weave this story together and it's worth either putting it on our homepage of our website, or we'll save it for our, our fundraiser dinner, whenever that is. And so those are the ones that I feel like most of the time when people are coming to us, they've either already done that, or they just have a hunch they need to do something different. And then, we tell them, throughout the year, sure, keep pumping out, your own, smartphone short, social media clips if you want to, or, you can hire us to do several productions, hire us to do, spend 2 or 3 days with you, and we'll create 12 short videos for you that you can trickle release throughout the year. And so part of it is coaching them too, like how do you hold on to content and not release it all at once, and just
schedule it out.
Yeah, schedule it out and use it throughout the year.
That brings up an interesting point. So to what extent do you find that stories still need to be high quality because there's a certain level of emotion to it, a certain level of you're feeling, you're also going through a process of transformation, there's a natural story arc that you're developing, versus kind of more of like a news, like buzzworthy, just news little clip that might do well on social media, where it just is kind of gets your attention, is like, oh, that's interesting, you're staying front of center or top of mind, rather than cultivating something out. Like what do you find is that difference between, yes, this is something we should spend a lot of time developing quality, versus this is something short it's going to go out on social media and people like, and then it goes below the feed?
Yeah, I mean, either it's a story that is highly unusual. It's not something that kind of fits the typical pattern of story. So it could be something. For example, we did a video years ago that on a little girl from Africa who grew up in the slums and ended up being,
the
chess queen, right? So it's one of those stories that you start telling, you're like, this story is much bigger because it's so unusual. And so, of course, that ended up being a Disney film, The Queen of Katwe. So either it's something like that where you're like, this is just a phenomenal story, you need to manage this, or it's a phenomenal personality. And I think that's the difference. A news clip, when you watch the news, very rarely do you really get to know and connect with the person. They just, they kind of tell a narrative of a story really to land some sort of news information, right? So, people are, not being able to pay their rent right now. And so really they kind of just use a person to kind of make a point of people can't pay their rent, but you never really connect with that person like you would, while watching a documentary or something else. It's because that you give the viewer a chance to really fall in love with and to cheer and to root for this person to make it. And so a good storyteller, just like all the films we watch, we're rooting for that person, to make it. And so that takes time. It takes a little bit more time. It doesn't have to be a documentary. It might just take another minute, but in the news industry, a minute is a lot of content. And then they're not willing to give up a minute, because it's all money. And so, but the reality is that minute can be really critical for connecting the viewer to that individual, which really at the end of the day, that's why donors give, right? I mean, they've given because they've connected with either somebody you've served or connected with the head of the organization. And so there's a personal draw, because, I mean, I always say, you start with the heart, and then you move to the head, and the hands come next of them giving. But you got to start with them caring and connecting, and not just saying, oh yeah, I understand what you guys do. You build homes for people who are poor. Well, that, I can tell you that in 30 seconds, but if you can grab my heart and connect me with a family that I'm rooting for, and I'm like, I want to be a part of their story too. Then now you've got a whole different level of donor. And I'm not talking about money. I'm just talking about somebody who's in it for the long run. They're also understand they want to play a part in the story. They eventually don't want to just keep giving checks, but also you're giving them value in the sense of them participating in the journey with this individual. And all that takes time to develop through story and connectivity.
No, that's great. And I think the point that you bring up is that really some of these stories that we're really fleshing out are really they're more like unique and inspirational, and like your story is only going to be as strong as your main character. And I think it is interesting that not everyone's story is worth fleshing out into a bigger piece, and some of those stories can really just be more of your social media posts that happen more regularly, but then really finding those ones that are really interesting and engaging, and then taking the time to really flesh those out, and is that's when it's going to be worthwhile.
Yeah, and doing that in a way that, we always kind of, the warning is not to always make the nonprofit look like the hero.
Yeah.
Right. And so people can sniff that out too, of like, oh, I know how this is going to end. Here's this poor person who can't help themselves, and then rescues them this nonprofit who then looks like the hero. And I think the nuance, the good nuance that you want to navigate is, it was a partnership. Like, we did not come in and rescue them. Like, there was already elements of greatness in this individual that really we just want to highlight and celebrate this story. And maybe the nonprofit's logo might come in at the end, but really it was this individual that you're celebrating. And it doesn't look like a bunch of boasting by this nonprofit that we look heroic all the time, because that also gets tiresome from viewers. So, that's an art. I mean, that's an art, and it has to be very strategic, and a nonprofit has to be willing to say, yes, I want the story to be primary and not just integrating our nonprofit narrative all throughout it. That's right. So, we always tell them, you got to decide between inspiration and information.
Yeah.
There are some videos that are informational, but don't mix them. Like, it starts to just feel a little bit manipulative in some ways of no, just tell a great story. Tell a great story, and sure, you can put your logo at the end, and people get it. They connect the dots. And, commercials do it all the time. You'll watch a commercial like, that was awesome. What company was that for?
Yeah.
But it made you feel something. And once they got you feeling something, they got you connected. I mean, Apple does it all the time.
No, I think that's absolutely a great point is, inspiration versus information. I love that spectrum that I tend to sometimes like to use as well. And I think you're right that people, especially now, especially the younger generation, is so much more attuned to if someone's just marketing themselves or self-promoting, and you're going to smell it out right away, like, oh, you're just trying to plug yourself in, versus telling a story of someone who is really as a strong character, is like authentic, genuine, and that's who we want to root for. I think is the people, not just the institution that's helping.
That's right.
And when we can connect to the people, then it's easier to root for the institution who's keeping all these people, like, who's almost more as a guide, helping them succeed.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, David, thanks so much for being on the podcast. It's been a great catching up with you. You just shared like so many helpful tips that I think, especially people right now, nonprofits, need to keep in mind, as I know these are difficult times for everyone. But in terms of staying present, you just need to keep on the forefront. Don't always watch out for donor fatigue, but at the same time, tell great stories.
Yeah. Stay positive, stay hopeful, and just keep telling great stories. People never tire of great stories.
Thanks. I know people can check out some of those stories. I know Silent Images, I think .org, I believe. Is it best way to?
Yeah, you can see a bunch of our stuff there. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for being on the podcast, David.
Yep. Thank you, Wesley.